Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again for your service as jurors in this case. I won't be giving a terribly long opening statement in this case because the facts of it are really quite straightforward. You'll learn that at approximately 3:37 p.m. on Monday, May 10th of 2021, the Iowa County Sheriff's Office received a 911 call from then 21-year-old Susan Pickett, reporting that he had come home to his residence at 602 William Street in Avoca to find his 54-year-old mother, Susan, and his pit bull dog, Chico, dead. That phone call kicked off an investigation that has culminated in Mr. Pickett standing trial before you today on charges of first-degree intentional homicide and intentional mistreatment of an animal causing death. In support of those charges, you'll first hear from Avoca Police Chief Dan Carey, who was the initial law enforcement officer on scene after the 911 call was received. He'll tell you how he made contact with Mr. Pickett while Mr. Pickett was still on the phone with the dispatcher. When Chief Carey asked him what happened, he'll explain how Mr. Pickett stated that his mom and his dog were dead in the residence. Chief Carey will tell you of his immediate observations of blood on the clothing, the pants, the shirt, and the shoes of Mr. Pickett. He'll explain how he and another responding officer, Chief Bill Schramm of the Muscoda Police Department, first made entry into the home, working their way through the main living areas, down the hallway to the last bedroom on the left. He'll relay how when the officers opened that door, they located the bodies of Susan Pickett and Chico the pit bull lying dead in a pool of dried blood on the floor. Chief Carey will note how Mr. Pickett mentioned him that he believed his mother's boyfriend, Ernest Wheeler, was responsible for their deaths. Treating the matter as a homicide, Chief Carey will tell you how additional law enforcement resources were called to aid in securing and further investigating the scene. In particular, the Wisconsin Department of Justice's Division of Criminal Investigation, or DCI, was called to assist. And you'll learn that DCI brought with them a number of special agents as well as members of the Wisconsin State Crime Lab's crime scene response team to the scene. John Earl, the team leader of the crime scene response team, will explain to us how the Pickett residence was processed for evidence. To give you a picture of what happened at the house, Mr. Earl will share with you a diagram of the residence that he created to help orient you, and then he'll walk you through some of the many photographs that were taken in the scene. Starting from the front entry of the house, he'll take us through the living room, the dining room, the kitchen, a view of the laundry room, and again down the hallway to that last bedroom on the left, Susan Pickett's bedroom, where officers had found her and Chico's lifeless bodies. Although the photographs of that room will be quite graphic, they're necessary because they'll help you to understand just exactly what happened to Susan and Chico and how they died. Mr. Earl will tell you what evidence was taken from the scene for additional processing, and he'll show you some of that evidence, including the knife and the heavy metal bar that were later identified as the weapons used to kill Susan and Chico. I expect you'll hear from several lay witnesses who will talk about the circumstances leading up to and on that day. Eric Gilbertson, an acquaintance of Mr. Pickett, will tell you how he stopped by to visit Sean on May 10th, around noon, a few hours before Mr. Pickett called 911, and he'll point out some of the things that struck him as odd about that interaction. I expect Mr. Gilbertson's visit to the home to be confirmed by Susan Pickett's neighbor, Victoria Nondorf, who observed Mr. Gilbertson stop at the residence without entering the house and subsequently leaving. I anticipate Ms. Nondorf testifying that other than Mr. Gilbertson, she observed no one besides Susan and Sean at the residence in the days leading up to May 10th. She'll also give you more of the backstory on the living arrangements at the Pickett residence. She'll tell you how Susan and Mr. Wheeler had moved out of their home to Des Moines, Iowa several months earlier without Sean, and how Susan had put the home up for sale. I expect Ms. Nondorf to confirm that Susan came back to the house a couple weeks prior to May 10th, with Mr. Wheeler dropping her off and returning to the state of Iowa within a few hours. Another acquaintance of Susan's, Kay Anderson, will confirm that Susan did plan to sell the home, but told her that she didn't know what Sean was going to do, and that he had no plans to move out of the house. I anticipate Ms. Andreessen testifying that in October and November of 2020, Susan frequently called her and said that Sean had threatened to kill her if she didn't do things for him. While you learn that Ms. Andresen encouraged her to call the police to report Sean, Susan never did so. I expect you'll hear testimony from Ernest Wheeler, Susan Pickett's boyfriend. He'll tell you how he and Susan had been together for roughly 5 years before she was killed, including living at their residence together in Avoca. You'll learn how Susan and Mr. Wheeler moved to Iowa in January, again leaving Sean behind by himself in Avoca, and he'll tell you, confirming again, that he brought Susan back to Avoca about a month prior to her death to finish packing up their home, which upset Sean, and as did Sean's recent discovery that Mr. Wheeler was previously placed on the sex offender registry. Mr. Wheeler returned to Des Moines the night he dropped Susan off, and he last spoke with her on May 6th. He was awaiting Susan's call to return to Avoca to pick up her and the remainder of their belongings to return to Iowa. But the call Mr. Wheeler received instead was a call from Chief Carey informing him that Susan was dead. On the expert side of things, you'll hear from Dr. Robert Corliss, the forensic pathologist who performed the autopsy on Susan Pickett's body. He'll explain to you in detail how the serious blunt force injuries to Susan Pickett's head were the cause of her death, and he'll describe the multiple stab wounds also sustained by Susan, leading him to conclude that her death was indeed a homicide. Some of those photos may again be difficult to view, but they're important in understanding of the extreme manner and force that was used to extinguish Ms. Pickett's life. Although not a veterinarian, Dr. Corliss also conducted a limited examination of Chico's body, and he'll be able to provide some brief testimony about what he observed on Chico as well. You'll see, however, that overall, this really isn't a complicated CSI-type forensic case, because there's no real dispute about who killed Susan Pickett and Chico. On that point, you'll hear from Michael Mansavage, one of the investigating special agents from DCI who interviewed Sean Pickett on the evening of May 10th. He'll tell you how Sean reported being upset about being stranded by his mom and Mr. Wheeler when they went to Iowa, leaving him home alone at the home in Avoca with no food. When they returned to the house about a month prior, you'll hear how Sean got into an argument with Mr. Wheeler, who then returned to Iowa. He will relay how Sean told his mom about Mr. Wheeler's sex offender past and how she was surprised by that and didn't want to believe it. Agent Mansavage will describe how after calling the police to report his mother's death, Mr. Pickett initially claimed it was Mr. Wheeler and some of his buddies who had returned to the house over Mother's Day, over the weekend of Mother's Day, tied him up and murdered Susan and his dog, leaving Sean there to take the blame. However, you'll also learn that when faced with the reality that this elaborate story simply didn't add up, Mr. Pickett came clean, and he told the officers the truth about what really happened. You'll get to watch a video of a portion of that interview with Agent Mansavage, during which you'll hear Mr. Pickett recount in his own words exactly what he did to kill his mother and dog, stabbing Susan in the throat and striking her 6 to 8 times with the metal bar, and hitting Chico with that same bar before stabbing him multiple times in the chest and throat. Each of these weapons was found in the bedroom where Sean said they would be located. What you won't hear from that taped interview is any indication that Susan was a frail 5'4", 84-pound woman, had physically attacked either Sean or his dog to provoke this deadly aggression against them. Nor will you see any significant injuries on Sean's body to indicate that he had himself been attacked or in any physical danger from Susan. To the contrary, I'll encourage you to listen to that video where Sean will tell you only that Susan and Mr. Wheeler had played mind games with him, but he'll state that his mom didn't fight him. She wasn't saying anything to him while he killed her, and that even Chico didn't try to defend her. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the gist of the state's case. And at the close of evidence, you'll be instructed by the judge on the law applicable to it, and you'll be asked to employ your reason and your common sense in weighing the credibility of the witnesses and the stories that you've heard from them. Based on that testimony and the evidence you've seen with your own eyes, again, it's not a complicated story, and I think you'll readily see how the physical facts presented will line up with Mr. Pickett's confession to show beyond any reasonable doubt that he intentionally killed both his mother and his dog. And it's for that reason that at the close of evidence, I will ask you to find him guilty of both counts. Thank you.
Attorney Erickson.